I always laughed when it was a controversy that he or Coppola or whatever were bad-mouthing Marvel movies, because, like, what are the fucking odds they would like a Marvel movie? Like, why would they like a Marvel movie? Like,
Yeah.
They're, like, 100 years old.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spoiler Warning Podcast. This is review number 579 with a review of The Irishman. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And if you're joining us for the first time, the Spoiler Warning Podcast is a weekly film review program. Each week in the show, we're going to dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest film releases coming to a theater near you. This week, we are talking about a film that is coming to a Netflix near you later at the end of this month. Netflix will be releasing Martin Scorsese's latest film, The Irishman. We got to see it at a special SF film screening here in the city recently, so we are choosing to do that review this week. But before we get through that, lately, Martin Scorsese has been in the news for some comments that he's made during an interview where he said some... he didn't necessarily say anything that bad about Marvel films, but the internet as a whole has sort of taken some umbrage with his comments saying that Marvel films aren't cinema. He published an article in the New York Times about sort of like qualifying the statements he made. And given that Martin Scorsese is now releasing a Netflix film with a runtime of 3.5 hours, it seems maybe fitting for us to kind of talk about his qualifications on the nature of cinema and maybe talk about sort of some of the ideas that he brought up in this article before we get into talking about the film that he is releasing.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah, he didn't mean to necessarily down talk Marvel films in general, but he did talk about the fact that the world of cinema we are in now is mostly sequels, reboots, and films that don't have risk or don't have like weight to what's happening in them.
Just wait till the Jumanji sequel about the Risk board game comes out.
But yeah, basically his complaint is that filmmakers in general have to appeal to wide audiences, and that little small films that people want to make can't necessarily be made because people have to build their projects towards feeding an empire of these sequels and these large running franchises instead of making little darlings that they can release into the world that little people will see. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the basics of what he's kind of saying. What did you think about his comments, Stephen?
Yeah, so I think... I mean, I mostly agree with his take. Like, if you watch the big movies from the 70s, like, you remember Scorsese became one of the biggest directors ever, right? And you go back and watch, like, Mean Streets or Taxi Driver or Raging Bull. It is amazing how much they trust the audience to sit and enjoy a film that is not going anywhere at the moment, you know? That level of, like, I am going to watch what the director did, I'm going to enjoy this character, and I'm going to reserve my judgment till the end of the movie. Like, that doesn't really exist anymore. It does. Like, you and I have a whole podcast where we talk about tons of movies like that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist in the movies that are expected to make money camp, right?
Yeah,
like,
no.
It's usually the other ones now, the ones that, like, did just well enough to justify their existence, but nobody thinks they're going to get rich off of them.
Yeah, like in this past year, we had either a Marvel films or a Star Wars film every single month the entire year.
Yep.
We had one Ad Astra this year.
Exactly. And, like, you compare Ad Astra to a movie like Mean Streets, and it's like Ad Astra feels like a Michael Bay movie compared to that. Like you're that style of just, like, let's have a kind of abrasive movie where we watch people just be people. That is mostly gone, right?
Yeah.
And I think in Scorsese's article, he's pretty even-handed about that, about, like, I'm talking about the kind of movie that I grew up in, that I started doing, the thing that meant a lot to me. He puts value statements on them that I don't agree with necessarily. Like, these are the ones that revealed something about a person. I think all sorts of movies can reveal things. Like, it doesn't have to be that style. But I get what he's lamenting, right? Like, he feels like there used to be room for a filmmaker to take risk, and there was trust that, like, they're going to maneuver you into a place you want to go, and audiences will buy that. And now, like, you know, we always joke about Civil Bro, right? That's kind of like one of the canonical, like, everybody loves the Captain America movies, but they're not really risking anything. Like, we know where they're going to start, where they're going to end. They look and feel the same way. when is the last time you really felt like challenged by a Marvel movie? There's great things about them, like diversity. There's like they're opening alleys that Scorsese never did, like female heroes, stuff like that. But they're not difficult in the way that like 70s cinema was difficult. So I think it's a valid point. I don't think he's 100% right to pick a word like cinema and be like, that is what I define it to be and nothing else. But his point is well taken. Like, if you only watch the top 10 grossing films of a year, you would not see many emotionally difficult, challenging things. If you watch the top critically acclaimed movies, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah.
But I think he's talking about the world of funding and the world of like what gets made and why. So, but I don't mind it. I think I mostly agree with him.
But I feel like he's taking like this intellectual high ground that I don't know if exists when you like, I don't know, adjust for inflation, like metaphorically speaking. Because I feel like like it was an event to go out to see a movie in the time where his early films were coming out, right? Like that's the thing.
You thought that train was going to hit you.
But in all seriousness, though, like you got dressed up and you went out to the cinema the same way you would get dressed up and go out to the theater. And really, if you go back and watch trailers for old films, I mean like old films, it would be like the equivalent is if you watch the trailer for like Independence Day and they're like, oh, these people are over here and then the aliens are going to come and then the hero's going to go and install a virus in the ship and you're going to want to see what happens next, right? It's literally like if you watch old trailers, it's like people say that new trailers are the entire plot, and visually they give you parts from the entire film. But like if you go back and watch the old trailers, there was a fucking narrator basically reading what nowadays would be the Wikipedia article for the film to convince you to watch the film where this hero is gonna like rise up and fisticuff the bad guy, right? And I think that like it was a different process, and I think that we are competing with so much in this world. Like I still honestly I get annoyed when it's hard for me to see a film to review because it's a film that's wildly popular and then suddenly all the showings are sold out. Because for the last 9 years, since that's how long we've been doing this podcast, or I've been doing the podcast, like I've been seeing at least one or more films a week to talk about them to no one on the internet.
Longer than that. We had like best of 2008, I feel like.
Yeah, it just, we've been doing this forever, right? Yep. And it's when suddenly we are having trouble scheduling it because there's a new James Bond. Like I remember the first time that I pulled up to the local theater in San Marcos, the weekend that a new James Bond film came out, and there was not a single parking. Like I literally drove to the theater thinking I would just walk up and buy a ticket. And suddenly there were people parking in neighboring shopping malls and walking over to see this movie. And I was like, I guess I'm not seeing it today. Because it just, like, it confused me because I'm so used to sitting alone in a mostly empty theater. And now there's more and more people packing all the theaters all the time. And I feel like it's just a different time.
Yeah.
And yes, we, like, specifically with the Marvel films, we have seen a bunch of films where we're like, we know this character can't die because literally they showed the trailer for the following movie like before this movie started. So yes, there's technically no stakes, but there's still emotional stakes. Like in Civil Bro, I've talked on this podcast ad nauseum about the scene where like Captain America is going to shove a shield like into Tony Stark's face. And I know that Tony Stark can't die in that moment where like Captain America is not going to shield bash him and kill him. But I feel the emotional weight between those two characters. And while I consciously know he can't die there, I feel like he could die there because the characters sell it. And I don't know, there's something about, it's different times. And I feel like you can't judge things in the same way. Yes, it's harder to make films. It's harder to make films. But I also feel so on the one hand, I get what he's saying because we are podcasters in a sea of podcasters, as I said, speaking to no one. And it's like, it's really hard for our podcast to get heard because there are 10,000 Walking Dead podcasts and 10,000 Game of Thrones podcasts and 10,000 Westworld podcasts. And there's so much content out there with so many people that want to see different stuff that like it's really hard for us to be able to bubble up. And if we were filmmakers, we would feel the same way.
Yeah.
We might have a script sitting in our back pocket that we really, really want to make, but we can't sell it. And we need like to either self-fund it or borrow money to get it made and have it show in like one theater in LA and then, or maybe send it off to a festival and hope it gets made. Yeah, I totally agree that it's hard to make the films you really, really want to make in a world where the studios only care about the bottom line. But I also feel like that doesn't take away from the good stuff that is in some of these films that are part of franchises and things like that.
No, I agree. And I think I think he recognizes as much as I could possibly expect him to while still being Martin Scorsese. Because, like, I always laughed when it was a controversy that he or Coppola or whatever were bad-mouthing Marvel movies. Because, like, what are the fucking odds they would like a Marvel movie? Like, why would they like a Marvel movie? Like, they're, like, 100 years old. They made, like, 3.5-hour epics about, like, mobsters and stuff. Like, why would they like Captain America? Like, there's no reason they would. Like, you mentioned the emotional tether, and in things like Civil War, like, see, I had to think to use the right word for that movie. In things like Civil War, like, I have Marvel fatigue. I already have more trouble than I used to of like latching on to the emotions of these movies because I feel like kind of paint by numbers formula taking place. Imagine if you have been making movies for the last 45 years. Like, of course you're going to feel that way.
Yeah.
So I feel like given all that, this is a remarkably non-combative issue where they're just saying things have changed. Different generations want different things. I don't latch onto the things that people are latching onto about these new movies, and that makes me feel bad. Like, I think that's completely fine. And if we're being honest, like, has a Marvel movie ever been in your top 3 of the year for the whole duration we've been doing this podcast?
Top 3? Yeah. No. But a Star Wars film has made top 5.
Yeah, I know. That's about as close as they've come. So, but that's the thing, is like Marvel sucks up all the oxygen, but when it comes to the actual craft that we remember, that we think about later, it's rarely up there. And so there's some disparity, right, between what it does in entertainment and what it does in lasting in your brain in a way that makes you want to praise it later.
But if I can play devil's advocate one more time, so he talks about film not having risk. But has there ever in the history of cinema been a cohesive effort to combine 22 films to culminate in one crazy over $1 billion grossing picture that brings together the entire world to have participated in 22 films or whatever it ended up being at the end? Like, that is insane. And yes, you can say that like there is one company that owns most of all of our theatrical going experiences, and you can complain about that all you want, but superhero films were god-awfully terrible before Iron Man.
Yeah, and I mean, so risk is the wrong word because they all took a chance on this genre, right?
Yeah. It's I just think that like it's hard. Like, Scorsese is very careful to say it's not a matter of necessarily quality, but it's a matter of like he tries to say it's a matter of taste several times, to not say that he's not saying those are shitty movies. He knows that people have worked on it, and like lots of people, blood, sweat, and tears went into it, and that's all cool. He's just saying that like it's not the movies he grew up watching, and for that it's hard for him to enjoy it. Yeah. But like there is something really, really amazing. Like it's still like every once in a while I think back to watching Endgame and just think about like this is like a decade of my life of watching film, and it fucking pulled off something crazy at the end that really got me. And like I don't know, it is the like cinematic equivalent of Lost, right? Yeah. Where it's like every single person you know is talking about it. And there are films that like years later everybody talks about and remembers fondly, or has blind spots that they're ashamed of not saying. Taxi Driver. But we live in a different world now. Yeah. I don't know, it just seems crazy to me.
So what I'm curious about is if Scorsese would think Star Wars: A New Hope is cinema or not. Like I want to know how he feels about the crowd pleasers of the era. You know?
Like delete the past, delete everything that came after the original, like the original starts to new franchises.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Like I want to know because those I would say are not fundamentally different from the crowd pleasers of today, where they're action and they're sci-fi, and I don't think. Because I think when he says risk, what he means is discomfort. It's like you're risking the audience feeling alienated. That is the thing that like he kind of prides himself in, is like, I'm going to put the audience in a place where they don't know what is going to happen. They don't know how they feel. And then I'm going to bring them back. And I will fully admit that no Marvel movie has ever done that to me. Like the Joker did. I was talking to you today how Joker has a lower score than Terminator Dark Fate. Like,
which is
clearly
sad.
These movies are not always being rewarded for doing the thing that puts you in an unpleasant situation.
Yeah.
But it's true. I haven't had any Marvel movie feel difficult or abrasive or challenging in that sense. It's doing a different thing. It's a feat of engineering. It's a feat of they pulled that off, right?
Yeah.
And that's a magic trick, and that's its own sort of entertainment, but it is a different kind. And I'm not going to put a value judgment on what kind is better.
Yeah.
But I understand lamenting the other kind when the other kind is like what you toiled at for so long.
And we have also talked, to Scorsese's point, about like, there are films that we saw at the Tribeca Film Festival last year which still aren't out, and they were beautiful, great things that if we hadn't have gone to the festival, we wouldn't even know existed. Mm-hmm. And there are some things that got dropped straight onto iTunes, which we probably still wouldn't know existed, other than like our allegiance to some of the actors and actresses in those
and these
films.
are the ones with famous actors and actresses, which is crazy. Like, imagine how many didn't even have that we didn't even watch at the festival.
Yeah. So I mean, I get his point. It's just hard for me sometimes. Like it's kind of like I started reading it. I didn't read the article until after having seen The Irishman.
Let's be real, you didn't read it till 5 minutes before we recorded.
People don't want to know how the sausage is made, Stephen. But I think that it's one of those things where like I went in ready to just like, I'm like, I think like I've told people after leaving The Irishman that I felt like publishing that article was a pre-defense of The Irishman. Like it was him saying like, okay, I made this 3.5 hour long like mobster epic that is really all about me and what I want to see in film, and probably will not appeal to that many people. And I want to get my word out into the ether explaining that what I was making was a piece of cinema.
Yeah.
And that like if you don't like it, it's because the world has changed away from being able to accept that. And I think that having read through his article, I feel like I feel like there's a little bit of both sides.
Sure. I'll give you that.
All right. Well, should we get into this review, Stephen?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. We're going to take a listen to the trailer for The Irishman, and then we're going to come back and give you a review.
It's over. They're all gone. Frank, it's time. It's time you say what happened.
Frank, I want you to meet my cousin, Russell Buffalino.
Better watch. There's a lot of tough guys around here. Did he tell you? You're not afraid of tough guys, are you? I didn't think so.
I was one of 1,000 working stiffs until I wasn't no more.
You got a good friend here. You don't know how good a friend you got.
Russell, he took a shine to me right away. After a while, he started giving me little things to do. I know you read a lot of things about me. I just want to say I'm sorry. I know I wasn't a good dad. I know that. I was just trying to protect all yous.
From what?
You didn't see what I see, what I've been through.
A friend of ours is having a little trouble. A friend at the top.
Hi, Frank. This is Jimmy Hoffa.
Glad to meet you.
Big business and the government is on the attack. You want to be a part of this fight? A part of this history?
Whatever you need me to do, I'm available.
Only 3 people in the world have one of these, and only one of them is Irish. You know how strong I made you?
I know things they don't know I know.
He said that? You sure he said that?
I'm worried nobody threatens Hoffa. I got records, I got tapes. They're done.
I had to put you into this thing.
Sooner or later, everybody put here as a date when he's gonna go.
I know how you feel, Frank. Trust me, I know how you feel.
We'll bring you back after you get your car.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the trailer for Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. It is basically the story of a... it's sort of the history of what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, and it really follows this one Irishman.
Yeah, Frank something.
Who starts off...
Sheeran.
Yeah.
Ed Sheeran's uncle.
Ed Sheeran's uncle, yeah. Or great-grandpa, based on how old he looks at the end of the film. But basically, it's about a man who kind of gets in with the mob and makes his way into becoming sort of the personal bodyguard of Jimmy Hoffa, and sort of follows the rise and fall of Jimmy Hoffa and helps to try to hopefully explain what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, who, if you don't know, disappeared mysteriously in like 1975 or something like that. Stephen Miller, what did you think of The Irishman?
So we watched this movie in the evening on a weeknight, which is difficult in a crowded theater because you are going to be there for 3.5 hours. In a crowd, you have to pee. You have to be up at 6 something in the morning the next day because you have a job with fucking meetings and shit. So this is, as you mentioned, like a kind of difficult ask for a movie. And while watching it, I'm going to say I only liked it quite a bit. Like, I was like, I enjoy this.
You only liked it quite a bit?
Yeah, I only liked it quite a bit while I was watching it. I was like, I enjoy this, but I'm tired also. And this movie is really... It is dragging things out. This is a long, slow movie that is like not afraid to take its time with scenes. As the movie built to its ending, it all kind of... It started to click a little bit more in this kind of link-lettery way of it like being about time and like the...
Is it because you aged 12 years while you were watching it?
No, but we'll talk about it more, but I feel like this is the kind of movie that like you have to have spent a lot of time with the characters to feel the weight of kind of what he's trying to pull off with it. And this is one of those movies that like the more I let it sit with me that night, the more I liked it. And I feel like I really, really actually enjoy this movie. So there's two kind of comparisons I want to make here. One, I think this is very much of a piece with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in that this is a famous director taking stock of the kind of movies he's been making his whole life and trying to give it a funeral dirge in an era that is maybe no longer about those things anymore. So I think that's one. He does it very differently than Tarantino does it.
That's true.
They do it in very different tempos, but I think they are accomplishing a similar thing. I don't think it's coincidence that they're both looking in like a similar era, actually, to...
We should just stop for a second and think about the fact that, like, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a long-ass movie.
Yeah.
This movie is fucking 45 minutes longer than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yep. Yeah, this is a long movie. and it does not have the pep that Tarantino's movie does that kind of, like, ushers you from scene to scene as if you're dancing, right? It's a different thing. The second thing I want to say, and I know this will mean very different things to you than it does to me, I think this is the first real mafia movie in a post-Sopranos world. And what I mean by that is, like, The Sopranos, what it does really well, pending taste, pending personal opinion, is it is not a movie about the mafia, but it's a movie about the American life that just happens to be in the mafia, right? It's a movie about, like, existential dread, what it feels like to get older, what it feels like to become more irrelevant, the feeling of like your job pulling you away from your family and vice versa. And in The Sopranos, the key idea, if I can do this without spoiling The Sopranos, is that like it almost doesn't matter who's going to live and who's going to die. Everyone is going to have the same shitty fate with only two options. Either you're going to get shot in the back of the head, the world is going to cut to black and you're not going to know what happened, or you live long enough to become Uncle Junior sitting in a nursing home watching birds, not remembering that he owned Jersey, right?
Either you die a hero or you live long enough to see
finish
yourself.
The Irishman. Yeah, those are the two options in the Sopranos verse, basically. Is like either you're going to die an unglamorous death that does not pay tribute to whatever you thought you built in your life, or you're going to live long enough to rot in a prison cell or not remember who you were. And I think this movie is very much Scorsese reckoning with that kind of thing, about like the stuff that you thought mattered in your life, these things that back in the Goodfellas days or whatever were going to be set to a soundtrack and going to be like cool and peppy and enjoyable, are now just going to be like, you kind of wasted your life while the people you loved and the actual family just kind of happened next to you and barely even got a minute of your thought, right? And that's what I think this movie is about, like realizing that the things you valued no longer are valuable and that the world is passing you by. And for the first 2 hours, at least, of this movie, it is just that story that is dragging a little bit, that is like an old guy recounting, these are all the things I did and all the people I knew, and this is me being Forrest Gump, who was in everywhere at the right time, and like all of that kind of thing. And I think it's all building to this kind of funeral dirge of like, none of this added up to anything, and what does life actually mean if I wasted all my time focusing on things that didn't matter? And there's a meta element of this movie that I really like, of like the director and all the actors are approaching the age now where we're not going to have them forever. And I very much think the last third of this movie is about reckoning with mortality. And I think it's interesting. Did I make a Linklater reference yet? Probably not.
Yeah. You
okay.
Well, yeah. You said like Linklater, and then I followed up with a joke about watching the movie as like Warhead.
Yeah. Like Linklater, though, I think this is very much a movie that is like trying to talk about the passage of time and the way it feels like to get older and maybe not wiser, but more numb to all the things that used to matter to you. And I think it is very successful in that vein. I don't know that it had to be 3.5 hours. I know the emotion, the toll it had on me. I don't know if it would have worked if it had been a short movie. I feel like you kind of need to have like suffered with the character for a while in order to feel the weight of that. But I quite liked the sadness to it in the end. I think it's a very interesting, complete thing that he built, even if I don't completely know what it's saying to me.
Yeah. It is an interesting comparison to bring up Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because most of the praise that I was giving that film was me seeing the strings of Tarantino reflect upon his career, and everything from the casting of people that have been in his old films and doing all sorts of this stuff felt like a work of genius when watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But that was also couched within a incredibly compelling story that beat by beat kept me on the edge of my seats, partly because it was all working towards one eventuality. In this film, we also kind of have an eventuality we're working towards, which is the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah, but there's not really an assumption that the audience knows the details of it.
But it's weird that while I can recognize the similarities there, it's like the simple on paper similarities is where sort of my comparison of the two films stops. I had heard from somebody that you thought I would not like this film, or I should say didn't like this film, because I was sitting like 4 people away from you during the course of watching this film. And that is an accurate statement.
Yep.
I did not care for The Irishman. And if you can entertain me for a second, Stephen, I want to read a quote from Martin Scorsese's article
Right.
which I read 28 minutes ago. But it says the pictures are made to satisfy the specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. They are sequels in name, but they are remakes in spirit, and everything in them is officially sanctioned because it can't really be any other way. And I feel like that sentence, which is in this article being attributed to Marvel films and the current state of cinema in general, directly applies to this film on so many levels. I feel like everything from the style to like I don't want to just do a voiceover, so I'm going to create this narrative in which a guy is sitting in an old folks home reminiscing to the audience about his past. Like he's like within the narrative, he is being asked by people in his world questions which he will not answer, but he is talking to us, the audience. There's also a scene later in the movie where De Niro keeps bouncing between the character he's talking to and the audience. I don't know if it's an accidental him looking at the camera, which was not edited out, and they just didn't have another take, or if that's purposeful him trying to like Fleabag his way into communicating with the audience. I don't know, but it's just a strange narrative to have this man who becomes the sort of bodyguard of Jimmy Hoffa kind of recount his story to the audience, throwing up all the titles of like, this man's gonna die this way and all this stuff. Like, it felt like somebody trying to do a Scorsese mob film in a way that like it didn't feel like it added anything. Like, there have been films that I've seen where I'm like, this is somebody trying to do a Guy Ritchie film, and it feels kind of annoying. And I felt like watching this film, it was like, so you got the gang back together and got them to do a stuff, but the story you're telling me, it like, the real problem I have with this film is I don't know a lot about Jimmy Hoffa other than the fact that he disappeared, and at one point he was like the president of the Teamsters Union. This film does nothing to teach me about the importance of the existence of the Teamsters. It does nothing to teach me about the importance of who Jimmy Hoffa was. It does nothing to teach me about really the importance of anything. Instead, I'm watching a series of actors who I recognize from other mobster things be mobsters in this film. And like, when Jimmy Hoffa's character is like, I need to get back to the top of the Teamsters, like, why the fuck, like, what, like, when you watch Game of Thrones, you know why somebody wants to sit on the Iron Throne. Like, you understand that. Like, you get the power that comes from sitting on the Iron Throne and ruling over the Seven Kingdoms or whatever, and like you understand what they're going for and why they want that power, and you understand the history between those characters. I mean, you've had 10 seasons or whatever the fuck it was. Like, you've had all this time to sit with them and learn all this stuff. And while this film is 3.5 hours long, that's not long enough to make me care about who these people are and what they did, but it's also too long for me to enjoy learning about them when I don't get anything from this experience. Like, there is nothing about this story that tells me why this story needed to be told. And I did go Wikipedia shit to figure out why we know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, and it turns out
we don't.
We have hearsay about stuff. So we have a character who ends the film telling the only people who could, like, so okay, back up. The Ted Bundy movie with what's his nuts?
Yeah, extremely vile, incredibly wicked.
What annoyed me about that film is there is a confession at the end of the film to a character who never told that confession to anybody, and it's completely made up artifice for telling the story because we want to believe that he confessed to somebody even though he maintained his innocence the entire time of the history of his life or whatever, right? That pissed me off because I was like, no, you can't just have a character have this interaction that there is no record of in existence and then tell that as your version of a narrative. This film does both. The character says, nah, I'm not going to tell you. And then the director shows us something, which is just hearsay from a character who's not even in his movie. And it feels like such a waste of time. I believe that Scorsese is obsessed with Jimmy Hoffa and thinks this is a great story to tell. But the problem is, he made a film that requires you to be in his head to care about the story. The things that you're bringing up about the emotional side of if you devote your life to one thing, you forgo the relationship with your family members. You may have all these other problems because you've chosen this one life. And that stuff is there. But the problem is I can't live this long through a film where that is all I get from it. You need to tell a compelling story to me. And there are scenes where people are arguing over a fucking apology, and I don't even remember who crossed who and who's mad at who. Like, it's the equivalent of somebody stepping on their shoe and then being pissed for life, and then someone ends up gone. Like,
See, I feel like that is the movie at its most Sopranos, basically, is like...
And that's the thing.
You had a problem with that. I laughed when you compared this to The Sopranos earlier, because what people may or may not know on this podcast, because I don't remember if we ever talked about it on air, is you watched The Sopranos late in life, and you wrote a large post about how it might be one of the best shows that's ever been on television. And I was like, fuck, now I got to go binge watch all of The Sopranos to know what the fuck's going on, because I trust your opinion, or at least, at the very least, I wanted to. I trusted your.
Yeah, I trusted. No, but I was like, oh fuck, I was never going to watch this because I'm not that interested in mob stories. But I was like, fuck, if this show's really this good, and also you compared it to films or shows that I think are some of the best shows that have been on television. Yeah. So I was like, even if I disagree, I need to see this, and I hated The Sopranos. So that's why I laughed when you compared it to The Sopranos, because I was like, probably. Yeah. This is probably the same stuff. But I just feel like this story, nothing in Scorsese's story dictates why this story deserved to be told. And in the end, I was wholly unsatisfied with any revelation or any sort of beginning or end to a character, because the film, in its 3.5-hour runtime, never took the time to make me care about anybody in the story. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it makes me feel, again, like my on paper comparison to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood should be deeper than that, because that is a reaction some people had to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood too, right? Yeah. Is like, why should I care about this historical event that didn't touch me, didn't mean anything to me? And the main characters that are involved might not even be real. Like, what is the point of all of this? And I don't have a good answer. Like, a few things I want to answer. One is that, who was Jimmy Hoffa? Why did he matter? I don't know that I care literally about that any more than I care literally about what happened to him and whether the story of this movie is accurate or not about the truth. I feel like this is a movie about looking back, and someone, I forget who, wrote that this is a movie about like hearing your grandpa like sit down and tell you a tall tale where you can't really believe half of what he's saying. Yeah. But what you are getting from it is his perspective on the world and how the world was and how he justified himself in the world. And I feel like what Pacino's Hoffa here represents is this kind of like the charismatic figure that draws you to them. And he's everything that Frank isn't in this movie, basically. Like, Frank is kind of a gruff guy. Early in the movie, we watch him find out that his daughter was maybe accidentally brushed by someone at a grocery store, and he like marches over and curb stomps the guy, right? This is a person who's very serious, very like, you're going to respect me, you can respect my authority, that is my personality, end of story. And I think Hoffa comes in as a kind of like counterbalance to that of like what happens when someone has charisma and charm and manages to like take the world by storm. And I think like what is interesting here to me is not the history of these characters, but it's how these people bounce off each other, which makes future events more meaningful or muddied or more like I feel like this is a movie that is like a very somber riff on the same thing Scorsese's been doing forever, where before, for the most part, you don't see regret or sorrow or sadness. You get a little bit, right? Like Ray Liotta, like old Ray Liotta, or De Niro at the end of Raging Bull or something, of people who are like used to be important and now aren't, right? Yeah. Kind of end of Wolf of Wall Street even, right? Like you get people who like were in their prime, and then you see the future where it's like the kind of hollow, more vapid version of their life later. Yeah. I feel like this movie is like so much is infused with the hollowness of it all, and it's really trying to hammer home this feeling of like, what was my life, what was my country, these people I was following, this duty that I felt obligated to, like, what did it all mean in the end when, without spoiling anything, like the course that my life went on would eventually make me kind of renege on everything that I thought mattered to me at another point in my life.
Yeah.
And there was something about it where the length and the slowness makes it be a kind of like meditative slow burn for me, where I fully 1,000% understand, like, if you're not on board for this movie, that slow burn is going to be a slow fucking burn.
Yeah.
And the movie is not going to give you enough of like, oh, huh, I didn't know that about Robert Kennedy to like make it be worth your while, right?
Yeah.
But I felt like I slipped into a groove where I really enjoyed what he was doing, and I think that feeling of sorrow, and basically the last like half hour of this movie, I feel like wouldn't have worked on me if not for the length of time that I spent watching this. But I want to bring up something that is not intellectual at all, that I think we will both maybe have more to agree on, which is de-aging. And how did you feel about de-aging in this movie?
I feel like my feelings are sort of what they were at the beginning of our Terminator Dark Fate conversation, where like, well, never mind, it's the opposite of that.
Oh, great.
Because in Terminator Dark Fate, I was like, yeah, it's cool. We should do this all the time. Like, it's totally fine. And I feel that in this, I mean, that's another fucking weird thing about this movie. Like, I'm sorry to get back into complaints and stuff, but it's part of your question is that, like, they're de-aging them like 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's not,
they're all Benjamin Button, basically.
And they're not de-aged for that long, it feels like. Like, pretty soon, they're just old again. And it feels like it's so weird to go through all the work to de-age them to tell a story that honestly does not span that much time. Like, there is never a like they're not doing body swapping where like there is a younger person playing young De Niro in the early days, like before he comes back from the war or whatever it was. Like, it's like he's just always 10 years younger than he is now, and then at some point they make him 10 years older too.
Yeah. I think the irony is they should have done what they did with De Niro in Godfather Part 2 of just cast someone else to be the young version and play side by side instead. I found the de-aging incredibly distracting at the beginning of this movie. And I think, so there are three great performances here that are classic Scorsese people. You've got De Niro, you've got Pesci, you've got Pacino is not classic Scorsese, but, you know, he's been mafia adjacent forever. So I'm going to nominate him into the Scorsese crowd.
There's one point in this movie where I'm pretty sure Pacino is doing a Bernie Sanders impersonation.
Yeah. Oh, there are some similarities for sure with Teamster Hoffa.
But it's just like he's doing the hand motions and he's like, wah, 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 wah. It felt very,
5%
very close.
or the 1%.
That's what he was doing. There was totally a scene where he did that. And I was like, someone else has got to be saying this, right?
1% of all fish in the back of cars. That kind of became JFK too. Anyway, so I
we sell to the unions.
Not because it is IFA, but because it is Hoff. So anyway, I think they're all great here. De-aging wise, I think Pacino makes it out the best among the three of them.
I feel like he's being the least de-aged.
Yeah, whatever they're doing to him is subtle enough that I'm okay with it. And his character is already a little quirky too, so like it works for me. Like, Pacino did not distract me at all. De Niro, after the first 10 minutes, I'm okay with him. Like, there are things like his eyes feel wrong because he has kind of like cloudy eyes, and I feel like they were trying to make him bright blue in a kind of like Polar Express way that I didn't vibe with, but I got on board for De Niro pretty quickly, you know.
Pesci is awful.
Joe Pesci, man, that is just like Smeagol the whole movie.
Yeah, there's some Gollum-ass shit going on.
I feel like I didn't really see Joe Pesci in this movie.
I mean, he's a diminutive man, but like, I just feel like there was something extra about him that made him look goblin-y.
Yeah. That one really didn't work. And often it was okay because he's seen mostly in like a dark restaurant or whatever.
Yeah.
But there were scenes where we just are seeing him in the light of day, and I'm like, how did you all decide this is like the representation you want?
Yeah.
And you're old already. Like, why not just be Joe Pesci? Like, I get De Niro because I know it is kind of interesting. They only de-aged a little bit, so he still moves like an old man, and that kind of uncanny valley is there.
Yeah, there's a scene where he runs out like to shoot a guy.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, what if he fell?
But I do think the combo of the ostensible age that they make the character look and just the way it's filmed, the 50s time versus present day in the nursing home, like I think there's a stark enough contrast there that I get why he did it. Like I understand like you're trying to see like two people looking very different. It's the opposite of Danny in the Terminator movie, where like we see apparently 30 years in the future and they look fucking exactly the same with cornrows. You know, this is like you are seeing a difference in the way they look. But man, Pesci. Oh, I would have loved to just see the Joe Pesci performance without de-aging applied to it.
Yeah,
just make him be a little bit older, and then when we cut to the time that is probably a spoiler to say what the time is, but it's like in between modern day and the original beginning of the movie, just like make him a tiny bit older and don't use CG for it, and it's going to be fine. He was an old man when you met him. It's okay. He's a little bit older now.
We talked about it when we left the theater, but there's one scene in particular that involves a bunch of them playing bowling. They are bowling, and they're in a bowling alley, and it's almost like the tracking isn't even correct. Like it looks like there is a stark difference between the heads and the collars of their neck.
Yep.
And it really took me out of the film.
It is very uncanny valley. And like that was one of the worst scenes for me in terms of the de-aging CG. Again, by the time you're maybe 40 minutes into this movie, they're close enough to caught up that the de-aging has become pretty minor and it isn't a big deal anymore.
Yeah.
But when you're first asked to care about all these people, like that is a tough pill to swallow. Yeah. And I wish he hadn't done it. It brings it into Hugo land more than it needs to, I think.
The really funny thing to me too is De Niro's playing an Irishman. If you're fine with him just playing an Irishman, why are you not fine with him just playing a young guy? Like, if you don't care on the one side of thing, why do you? I don't know. It just seems like he's willing to stretch the level of reality for other things in the story, but doesn't like. He's like, no, the aging. We have the technology now.
When's the last time you saw modern day De Niro? Imagine him playing like a 25-year-old man without anything being applied.
I don't know.
That'd be tough, I think. I think the right call would have been to cast someone else to play young him.
Yeah.
And I get he didn't want to do it because he wants the movie to be like a Boyhood type thing where like you are seeing that person over the years. So like I get philosophically why he thought he had to do this, but I just think that is going to really make this movie not age well, ironically, because cut to 5 years from now, and I think it's going to be unbearable, the CG in this movie.
I mean, it really doesn't matter, though, Stephen, because like my prescription changed 3 times over the course of watching the film. So by the end, even if it was the same exact guy with the same exact makeup, I would have thought he looked older.
It looked different. One thing I thought was funny is so everyone is being de-aged in this movie, right? They're all old people who are made to look a little bit younger, except there's one guy, you probably won't know him, but he's an actor in like every HBO show. His name's Dominique Lombardozzi. He plays Tony Salerno. So he's the guy that like, he's someone who doesn't like Jimmy Hoffa in this movie, and he has some power. And there's a scene where someone says it is what it is, and that's coming from this person.
Yeah.
That guy is like young and dressing up like an old man in the 60s. Like even like when it was just a random actor, they still were like, no, we're going to fuck with their age. Like, he couldn't just cast age-appropriate people to play these characters. That made me laugh. I did like seeing the kind of greatest hits of Scorsese / mafia movie people. Like, you know, you had that trio of De Niro, Pesci, and Pacino. But then you also had like Harvey Keitel showed up, and he's not even in it very long. I kind of feel like he was just there so they could say Harvey Keitel was in the movie.
Yeah.
People who I wouldn't have thought being in mafia movies, like Ray Romano, I kind of really enjoyed in this movie. I don't know. It was fun to see all the actors get together, and that was kind of a thrill that it shared with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood of like, all right, you're just like having a blast with like the biggest crew of people you can muster.
Yeah, but it just, once again, it feels like all those people wanted to be in the Scorsese movie, not like, man, this is a really good story that I want to tell. And I think that, like, too, going back to other things, like, you watch a film like in Casino, like, learning about how the casino works is fucking entertaining, right? Like, just seeing the inner workings of everything and getting that voiceover of, like, how the pit bosses work and how they watch this and that and, like, everything that happens, like, that shit's great. Like, that is stuff that entertains me while I'm on this journey. Like, I don't remember anything from that movie except for, like, those type of things where it's like, give me something to care about the world that I'm in. Like, for me, nondescript mafia guy double tapping nondescript other mafia guy because they nondescript like them or not like them. It just, like, here's the thing. De Niro's character acts as, like, he's the guy who does a bunch of the hits for the mob. Not because he's like fucking John Wick or something where he's just proficient at killing. He's just the guy willing to do it. Nothing about those interactions feel like this is a man to be feared. He's just the man who is tasked with it and does it because he likes his job.
And he completely is. He's the duty-bound guy who doesn't care. Like, you don't know if he ever feels anything in this movie, I think.
Yeah. And it just, that was not interesting to me. It just wasn't a compelling story. And it wasn't even a person that like, I don't know, like, if you look at the old dude from Breaking Bad, who, like, sort of is like Gus Fring's guy and then becomes like Walt's sort of dude. He's in,
I forget the actor's name, but I know who you're talking about.
He's in Better Call Saul. Like, that guy is great. And sometimes it feels like he doesn't even like doing the stuff, but he does it because he's just good at it and he does it. De Niro's not that sort of character. He's not compelling at all in any way whatsoever. He's just the guy who's doing it, and you're watching it because it's De Niro. He doesn't have charisma on his own, and I think that's what this film lacks if you compare it to something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in that all the fucking characters are charismatic, and you at least like those beat-to-beat moments with any of them. But, like, De Niro kills a number of people over the course of this film, and I really don't care ever when it happens, and I don't think he cares. I don't, like, it's hard for me to care about anything in this film because none of it feels real, even though it's supposedly based on real life events, right?
See, I feel, what I feel from his killing is a numbing quality, and they did work on me mostly. There's one that I won't spoil in particular that's kind of like a major moment in the film that worked extremely well on me, and the way he underplays it, to me, it becomes about the gruff guy who doesn't show what he's feeling, but deep down you know that he's betraying something core about himself. And I felt like I was reading that into the movie. You mentioned Casino, and I think it's an interesting comparison because Casino to me is like the ultimate empty calorie Scorsese movie, right? Where it's like, it's fun from scene to scene, but I would say it's like very minor in terms of like, what do I remember or what was it saying about anything, you know? And The Irishman is pulling, it isn't full on vegetables, but like it's way more in that camp where it's like I watched Mean Streets this weekend with Joanna because I was like, I'm gonna like catch up on some Scorsese movies just to feel like, you know, complete the whatever. And I couldn't believe early Scorsese how much he leaned on the soundtrack and tracking shots and stuff like that. Like almost every scene a song is playing, right, in old Scorsese movies.
Yeah.
And The Irishman, I feel like, is mostly pretty silent. Like it does not have that kind of like pep and flair and like let's pull the audience from scene to scene and like trick them into feeling like they're having an exciting time. This is very much like you are going to lumber through this life like I did, and you're just going to see it in like the cold light of day. And like hits are just going to happen without fanfare. They're going to be so sudden. They're going to be violent, but it's not going to linger on the violence in a fun way. It's just going to be like, hey, wife and kids, boom, I killed you. End of scene. And I think it's an interesting move. It is a move of him being more somber, more like reflective. And for me, putting it in line with everything else he made, I really like the fact that he did it. Would this ever be the Scorsese movie I like throw on to have a party? Like, no, The Departed is obviously that movie. Everybody knows that's the most like straightforwardly fun Scorsese movie, I think, is The Departed. That's my feeling, at least.
I won't say what I think about The Departed.
Okay. Anyway, for me, like, he has lots of movies that are just straight up fun, where you have morally compromised characters, and it's challenging, but maybe not like uncomfortable challenging, more just like a little layer of ickiness. That's him at more Tarantino levels, and I feel like this is him at much more, I'm going to be reflective, and I'm going to make you ponder something, and I'm going to leave you with an uncomfortable feeling. And that is not crowd pleasing in the same way, but I'm really happy for it. And I think Netflix is the right home for this movie, because people can watch it. They can take their half-hour break in the middle if they have to. And if they stick with it, like you stick with a marathon of the Godfather movies or something, I think you're going to walk away feeling things.
So here's my question for you then, as a follow-up to that last statement, is you talked about how the beginning of this is a really, really slow burn, and it's really once everything starts to come to a head at the end, and it's something that, like, it sort of earns its passage to you. Mm-hmm. Let's pretend that this was this week's Netflix release, and we were still reviewing it, but your schedule was kind of full. You didn't know how much time you had. You knew this was 3.5 hours. An hour into it, would you have been like, I don't think I'm going to finish this, and bounced, or would you have powered through on your own volition? Because I feel like when you see a film on Netflix that you're not already super excited to watch, mm-hmm. especially if it's an incredibly long runtime, it's very, very easy to bounce away from that and to suddenly go and like, you know what? I don't really like, there have been things I've seen in theaters where I was like, man, if I wasn't like dead center and I wasn't going to have to make like 17 people get up, I would probably just bounce out right now, because I'm too old for this shit.
So I do think I would not have done well with this movie on Netflix, because lately I've had trouble, unless I like put my phone in another room or something, of being just 100% absorbed in a movie. But I am a goddamn stickler for finishing a movie I start. So I would have finished this movie no matter what. Even sitting at home on Netflix, I wouldn't have given up on it. I would have like kept watching and powered through. But I agree, the theatrical experience is better. I just don't think a 3.5 hour movie is gonna kick ass in theaters right now. So I'm glad like the world can watch it on whatever time frame works for them. But yeah, I wouldn't have given up. I don't know that people would have too, because again, like, I can't hammer this enough. Like, early Scorsese tried your patience a little bit. Like, he was not always just giving you what you want all the time too. So I feel like his cachet makes people at least sit through and be like, hey, maybe something is going to happen that I haven't anticipated yet, and give it kind of the benefit of the doubt. And that is really like a privilege that he has that a lot of directors don't have, probably.
So if he ghost made this film and it was like some made up name attached to it,
mm-hmm.
Like
the Scottishman,
whatever, Sheeran.
Sheeran Loathing and Detroit.
If that was the case, would you have been like, damn, this looks like a cheap knockoff of a Scorsese flick? Or would you have been like, damn, the achievement of this story is so great?
I mean, like, first, I want to say, yes, I would have liked it no matter what, because obviously I think the art stands on its own, but I can't separate those two things, right? Like, I'm watching this as, like, what if I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and didn't know it was Tarantino? Like, I don't know. It would kind of feel like a knockoff of Tarantino where they're not getting the point fast enough. Like, but the knowing what it is makes you watch it differently, right? And I watched this movie kind of savoring it in a way that maybe I wouldn't if I was like, oh, what is this direct to Netflix no-name directors thing? And it's not fair. But yeah, I do think I watched it differently, knowing it's Scorsese and knowing it's commenting on the rest of his career. But I can't unknow that. So I really liked it.
Touche, Stephen. Touche. So should we get to verdicts?
Sure.
Stephen Miller, if you're going to give us a must-see, a recommend with a caveat, wait for until, pass with a caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
I gotta say, it is what it is. Must see.
I am going to give it a pass with a caveat. I did not enjoy this film. But yeah, it is what it is.
That's up there with Tony telling Ralph Cifaretto to kill somebody without ever saying to kill him in like awkward mafia side speak, I feel like. Let him know it is what it is. Is it? Yeah.
It is. But yeah, so that is going to be our review of The Irishman. Stephen Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
If you want to paint my house, you can go to twitter.com/sdavidmiller or sdavidmiller.com.
I would like you not to paint my house, but for anything else, you can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or twitter.com/ChristopherIRL. You can find the podcast over at thespoilerwarning.com, where you can get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so in Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want to know when the episodes go live, you can follow it at twitter.com/spoilerwarning, facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. Music for this episode will come from the soundtrack to The Irishman, so hopefully you are enjoying that. And yeah, we are going to take off. Steven's going to be doing some traveling coming up. But yeah, as we joked about after our span of all the episodes coming out of Toronto International Film Festival, we jumped a bunch of stuff, and now we're going to have a kind of a spotty thing for the next few weeks. But we're going to be heading into Christmas with like everything that we haven't seen this year yet. Yep. So there will be plenty of things coming your way. So look forward to those episodes, and we will see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.